Hey, what's going on? It's Gentleman Wizard here, coming to you with a video that I think, if it hasn't been done yet, is the first one done, but chances are there's someone on the planet that came up with this idea. It's Dead by Daylight versus Friday the 13th. Now, these games are pretty different. They have their own merits to stand by. They have their own features. But there's also a lot of similarities. They're both horror-themed. They both are asymmetrical multiplayer games. And the goal of the game, for both of them, primarily revolves around escaping their respective maps by accomplishing certain objectives. And of course, dying is not the goal in both games. So my mission with this video is to kind of go further in detail of what features are for both games, and maybe hopefully determine if this game or that game is the right one for you. So let's get into it. Okay. So I made myself a Venn diagram for this. And if you want to get a copy of this, I'll have a link in the description. But let me go over Dead by Daylight. So some of the features of Dead by Daylight are, there are different types of killers. So you have a trapper who uses traps to trap his victims, of course. You have a nurse that warps around to get through objects, obstacles, pallets. If you're unfamiliar with the game, pallets could be thrown down to prevent a killer from getting to you, and the nurse could bypass that. There's also Michael Myers in a DLC. The nurse is also DLC, but there's also Michael Myers whose style is pretty interesting. He does not alert you unless you see him, of course. He does not alert you in the game, and then if he reaches a second tier, because he has 3 tiers of power, he could alert you, but he's still a sneaky bastard. And then if he stalks you, he could go to tier 3 where he could down you in one hit. So every killer has a very different flow and can impact how you approach every game. The primary exit strategy involves powering on generators to power the exit gate, and then lifting the exit hatch to escape. I think it's called an exit hatch, I'm not sure. Now, the player count in each game, you have 5 players. There's usually 1 killer versus 4 survivors. There's also a ranking system, a la Call of Duty. You can prestige your characters so that you can unlock a more fleshed out skill tree or path. And during using this skill tree or path, you could choose different perks along the way, which are pretty cool, or items to use in each match. The killer, in most cases, unless they have an add-on, cannot outright kill you. They have to bring you to a hook to be sacrificed, which is interesting. Voice chat, as far as I'm aware, is not a thing in the game directly. Although I didn't look through all the settings, you have to use a third-party chat program. I use Discord. But even then, you cannot chat with the killer directly. There's no way you could chat with them unless you somehow have them in your Discord as well, which would have to be set up, and you guys are probably boosting if you do that, which is fine. I mean, everyone has their own methodology. The game now is a year old. It came out on June 14th, 2016. So it's over a year old now. But the player count has been pretty faithful to it. I just checked on Steam, and there's over 10,000 people playing. And that's been pretty consistent. I checked the Steam stat numbers on average, and I usually see it around 10,000 or so in the mornings. Because globally, a lot of people play this game, apparently. People play it in Japan as well as in Europe. I'm not 100% sure what area of Europe, but I know there's some people that play it overseas. The base game price for Dead by Daylight, you could find it for $19.99 on Steam. Although you could probably find it cheaper if you use a website like g2a.com or Where did I shop? Oh, Humble Bundle. You can find it cheaper there too. Usually, I'm not sure if it's on sale right now. But yeah, you could find it pretty cheap for probably half that price. I bought it for like $11. There is a deluxe edition of the game for $30. And there's also about $30 of DLC. So the game could get you over $60 if you go for everything. And I have probably what amounts to about $50 of content for that game. And like I said, pretty faithful community, over 10,000, and that's pretty impressive considering the game's over a year old. Now that's pretty much a breakdown of Dead by Daylight. So now let me go over Friday the 13th. Now there's only one killer in the game, and that's Jason, which makes sense because Friday the 13th revolves around him. Although the first Friday the 13th, if you guys watch the movies, is not him, technically it's his mom. So Jason is the only killer, but there are different types of Jasons to use. You got Jason from Part 2, who has the potato sack on his face. You got Jason from Part 6, who has a little spear. Well, it's kind of like a fence tip, which he takes from early in the movie. Early in the movie to stab a woman in the face with. And you got Jason from Jason Goes to Hell, which, you know, that guy, the mask was kind of fused with his face. So there are different types of Jasons, and it's pretty interesting. Every Jason has different strengths, and the way the developers made the Jasons are pretty faithful to the movies. Like Jason in Part 3, he got knocked out like 3 times in that movie, and one of his weaknesses is getting knocked out. So it's pretty cool that they gave it that extra attention to detail. The game's strategy has a couple of them. So the strategy in the game, of course, like Dead by Daylight, you don't want to get killed. But there are a couple ways you could escape, which add a little bit of different spice to each game. You have a car. There's a 2-seater car or a 4-seater car. If you have both of them, don't go for the 2-seater unless you're a douche, because then that means there's 2 less people that could escape with you. But you have a 4-seater car. You have a boat, which is only for 2 people. You got the option to call the police, which shrinks the time of the game from 20 minutes to 5 minutes. And you could also try to kill Jason, which is pretty tough, but is possible. And it almost happened to me, which, if you let that happen to you in a real match, you have to really suck. I'll cover killing Jason in another video down the line, maybe. Now, each game consists of 8 players. There's 7 counselors and 1 Jason. So 7 people and 1 Jason for a total of 8. Even if killed off, so let's say you're playing as a counselor and you get killed off, you could come back as Tommy Jarvis. So even though you get killed, the game might not necessarily be over, which keeps me interested. Which, like, if I get killed in Dead by Daylight, it's like, well, what do I do now? Sit here with a thumb up my ass? So I like that. You can level up, but there's no ranking system like Dead by Daylight. Dead by Daylight, in case I missed it, has a ranking system in place. So a prestige system a la Call of Duty, where in Friday the 13th you don't necessarily have that. Jason could kill you in a number of ways, which is pretty cool. He kills you. I had a guy who dressed up as the Jason from Part 2, and he just punched people's faces off. And every time he punched a person's face off, he would say, Hadouken! Which is pretty hilarious. The voice chat mechanic of the game, which, if you're going to play this game, you definitely need a chat headset, because you're not getting the full experience, in my opinion. I've never seen a game that is just a completely different game with voice chat. This is how I feel about Friday the 13th. You need a voice headset for this, because the killer could talk shit to you and really terrorize you with a chat headset. The chat mechanic is really awesome because you could hear him talking to you. Now, of course, if you're too far from him, he can't talk to you. You could talk to other counselors using a walkie-talkie, or if they're near you, you could talk to them and say, hey, what's going on over there? And I really like that. It really makes you feel there, like you're more immersed in the game, and I really love it. This game came out less than a month ago, so it came out on May 26th, which is concerning because I'm about to share the numbers for the player count right now, but I'll get to that in a second. This game is $40, which is also another speed bump for some people. $40 is pretty expensive for a game that doesn't have a lot of content, in my opinion. It doesn't have no DLC yet, which is, I mean, it's only a month old, so it's not going to have DLC. And the map variety is pretty lacking. There are, I guess, 3 maps, although I wouldn't know. Every map seems the same to me. But there are map varieties, and the maps that you do play on are very faithful to the movies. It's just every map feels very samey, and there's not a lot of variety. Whereas in Dead by Daylight, you have a cornfield, you have an asylum. They just added a hospital in the last DLC, so there's a lot more map variety, which I like. And the community of this game is not as competitive, which is good. The game community is a lot more fun-loving, and you could tell in each game everyone's just having fun, talking shit. Whereas, you know, usually after a game of Dead by Daylight, if you got killed early, you're probably salty and gonna talk crap, or if you're the killer, you're gonna probably talk crap if the survivors are being douchebags. But now that this game has been out for almost a month, the player count, last I checked on Steam, is around 7,000 right now, and it's been like that for the last week or so. So I think the honeymoon phase for a lot of people has ended, and the variety of gameplay, the variety of maps, the variety of, in general, because there's not a lot of killer variety either, although the Jasons are different variations, their skills still kind of use the same methodology. You could shift, you could morph, I think that's called, and that's it. I mean, there's some other strengths and weaknesses, but I mean, it doesn't feel vastly different from Jason to Jason. Some Jasons can run, some Jasons can't, but you make up for that with a shift ability or a morph ability, you know, you name it, but it feels very samey. And that's the thing, like, the variety is a big thing for me. Although, you know, I'm not saying Dead by Daylight is screaming variety. It just felt like things played out differently, and it was more exciting game to game in Dead by Daylight. So let me go over something in closing. I have some closing sentiments I want to cover. I try to be as objective as possible. I think both games are amazing. I hope the developers of Friday the 13th stand behind their product and continue to build it. There are whispers of a story mode being added, and there's still plenty of Jason and map options to be used, like the Manhattan or spaceship from Jason X, Pamela Voorhees Killer DLC, etc. For $40, it's a tough sell unless you really love the film series or have friends that already own the game and you plan to play with them. It's also, although I just checked the Twitch numbers, it's usually rated pretty highly on Twitch because a lot of people just enjoy watching people die, which is pretty cool. Dead by Daylight is also a Twitch favorite, but now that it's over a year old, it's not as popular. I don't see it anywhere on the top list anymore. Dead by Daylight is a great value at $19.99, and you can find it even cheaper than that. The developers keep on updating the game, and although on the community hub you will find a lot of people slamming them for taking their time with updates, for a game that's over a year old, for them to still be updating the product is a sign the developer stands behind their product. I think that should be commended. It was a pretty big update that came out early May, and maybe they thought Friday the 13th was going to steal their player base, so maybe they were a little bit more concerned. So maybe that's why they made the update, but the update was pretty big, and it sparked a big change to the UI, at least the menu user interface. The competitive drive made me want to reach rank 1 as a survivor, but at the same competitive atmosphere can also be too much, as there are more try-hard killers, in my experience, that camp or tunnel that just make the game a frustrating experience if game flow doesn't go your way. Because every match plays out differently. Most of the matches you might be a smart survivor and stay as far away from the killer as possible. While other times, you know, maybe you'll match up with a Myers, he'll sneak up on you and down you, and next thing you know, you might be on hook, and none of the survivors might want to come for you. So, you know, as you could be very good in the game and be very smart, but everything plays out differently. And last but not least, if you die in that game, you do not come back as Tommy Jarvis. So, I mean, in closing, because now this video is probably going to be a pretty long one, I'm going to cut out some of my mess-ups, but in closing, I think both games are great. I think if I'm going to recommend one, I would probably want to recommend... That's a tough one. I've spent over 100 hours in Dead by Daylight. I've spent 30 hours in Friday the 13th. So, I would have to recommend Dead by Daylight at this point, because even 30 hours in, I feel like I've seen everything that needs to be seen with Friday the 13th. Which is kind of sad, because I really love the film series, and I feel like they just need to add more content to keep me coming back. Dead by Daylight, maybe it's a little unfair because I played a ton of Dead by Daylight, and although the games do offer different experiences, the core mechanics, kind of going back to what I said earlier, it's an asymmetrical horror-themed game. The goal of the game primarily revolves around escaping and, of course, not dying. Those mechanics are still the same for both games. So, maybe playing so much time in Dead by Daylight made me feel more tired of Friday the 13th sooner than I should have. But, whatever it is, I spent more time in Dead by Daylight before getting tired of it than Friday the 13th. I felt like it just needs to be more in Friday the 13th to keep me coming back. At least single player wise, because there's no ranking system. Gameplay itself feels a little bit too RNG for my liking, so I guess that's that. The fact that Dead by Daylight is still getting a pretty good turnout in terms of players and updates is reassuring, and hopefully the developers keep on their job, and hopefully it keeps coming back and forth. Hopefully it's competitive, because if Friday the 13th keeps a loyal player base, it'll drive Dead by Daylight to be better, and Dead by Daylight, by continually releasing updates and content, will force Friday the 13th to do better. So hopefully, you know, player bases for both games stay involved, and hopefully that all depends on what the developers do from this point forward. But yeah, so that's me, Gentleman Wizard, giving you my opinion on both games, seeing as how I own both of them. Hopefully you've enjoyed this video and I didn't put you to sleep. If you guys enjoyed this, you know what to do. See you later. Bye.